Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle program, and I'm your host, Chris Angle. I'm the author of 5 books on philosophy, known as the Detmar-Haskell Dialogues, and they are The Nature of Aesthetics, The Nature of Ethics, The Nature of Truth, The Philosophical Equations of Economics, The Nature of the Political Left and Right. And if you'd like to contact us to make comment, give us an email at detmar.haskell, spelled with one L, at icloud.com. The purpose of the philosophical angle is to examine the nature of concepts and ideas in current media. And this week we'd like to talk about crime, the National Guard, and the District of Columbia. Why the criticism by the Democratic left? So in August 2025, the Democrats are criticizing President Trump and his administration for bringing in the National Guard into Washington, D.C. He did it to lower crime, as the crime in Washington is famously prolific. But everybody's against crime, or one would think so. So why are they criticizing him? It's kind of amazing. It seems that the Democrats are for crime. Why would that be? Why would they signal that they're for crime? And their other excuse is that of it's racist. Of course, it's a funny excuse because how do you know what crime is going to happen in the future against anybody, whatever the race? Who is it? And what kind of races will it happen to? They can say, statistically speaking, it'll happen to black people, so why not cut the crime for black people? What's racist about that? Obviously, they're being disingenuous. But why? Let's discover why. There are 7 principles by which the both left and the right operate. And the principles are the opposite of each other. The first 4 of which in this case are applicable here. The reason they don't want crime to go down in Washington, D.C., or probably any other big city for that matter, is that if crime were to go down, then there's a possibility that the neighborhood or the town or the city would prosper. And if it were to prosper, then the educational and level of knowledge that the big city inhabitants would possibly expand, and everybody becomes more prosperous due to the influx of knowledge. How is it that we can predict this? And when I say predict, how is it that knowledge will necessarily increase prosperity? Well, we know this for 2 reasons. First is that knowledge is the most preponderant variable in the equation that dictates economics. The basic equation is that time plus information knowledge plus effort plus material in an atmosphere of risk is equal to the reward side of the equation that we see when we make a sacrifice. So on one side of the equation, we have a sacrifice consisting of risk, information, time, effort, and material. And when we make this sacrifice, we do it in order to get a reward. And we initiate the sacrifice when we judge that the product of the sacrifice is low and the product of the reward is high. Therefore, a small sacrifice versus a large reward equals a high motivation. And of course, the converse would produce a low motivation. Secondly, in today's advanced society, The number one ingredient in this equation is knowledge. As things get more and more complicated and as efficiencies are added into society, it is by the addition of knowledge that these products come into existence and then afterwards become even more and more efficient and better for society. Once this happens and more knowledge comes into society, it is put to use for the diversification of the products and services that we are generating. And we generate products and services in order to make our lives better, which brings us up away from misery. So knowledge generates efficiencies in products and services, and they become more and more complicated. They become more valuable, and therefore, the people that learn and have this knowledge become more and more valuable to society because they possess the knowledge needed in order to produce these goods and services as they become more efficient and specialized. Thus, you see in our universities, they diversify their courses. They differentiate the courses to match all the new disciplines that come out. And the most obvious of these disciplines in the last 25 years is computer science. It has grown immensely within the academic environment. So we now know that through the process of accumulating knowledge, goods and services, more and more become specialized and will bring prosperity naturally to the individual who proceeds down the road of acquiring all this technology, as the person who would become more valuable to those companies that produce these goods and services. Of course, crime would interdict this process. And so it's natural that a clear-thinking people would want to eliminate the crime so that the people in the neighborhoods can proceed along the path we have just delineated here. However, we still have not really answered the question, why would the Democrats want to intervene in this process? Well, the answer is that as people gain more and more knowledge and become more and more prosperous, they tend to leave the Democratic Party. I know this is a surprising and astounding statement, but it is true. As societies develop, they tend to leave the left. Why? It is because of the 7 dictums that we have just mentioned at the start of today's program. And in particular, it's because of principles number 1 and number 4. Number 1 is that all life does that which is good for it. And number 4 says that the Democratic Party follows the concept of noblesse, oblige. Well, what is that? Back in the 1820s or thereabout, just after the French Revolution, the nobles in Europe sat around trying to figure out how to prevent another French Revolution. After all, they didn't want their heads cut off again. So they did this at the Congress of Vienna in 1815 after the Napoleonic Wars, after the French Revolution, previous to that. So they, or that is the aristocracy, or those who control society, sat around and decided that in order to prevent the have-nots from rebelling, again, the aristocracy would make a covenant with the have-nots of society, which were the proletariats, the serfs, the slaves, the common man, the working stiff. They, the haves, would make a covenant or contract with the have-nots in that the nobles have an obligation to take care of the have-nots of society. So the European nobles got together and decided that they would all help each other when trouble arises, and they would all try to take care of the have-nots of society by giving them a base living, a job, enough money for food on their table, enough money to buy a bottle of wine or whatever. This would make them satisfied to the extent that they could live their have-not lives, and it would satisfy them to the extent that another French Revolution would not occur. So from this concept of noblesse oblige came the concept of socialism. And in 1848, the well-known famous Communist Manifesto was published and became a world-famous document. But its origin is from this concept of noblesse oblige, and that the nobles shall take care of the have-nots of society. So their thought process is that if they take care of the low information voter, the have-nots of society, then they will have fulfilled their obligation, and this will encourage the low information voter to vote for them, fulfilling the need of the haves to remain in control of society, as they have done for the last 5,000 years. Likewise, the low information voter, as Rush would say, will vote for the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party fulfills their end of the bargain by providing society with welfare, transfer payments, and other means to enjoy life without having to work much for it. It's the part of the noblesse oblige. But information knowledge destroys this contract and destroys this understanding. So as society grows in its knowledge, the destruction of the allegiance of the low information voter to the haves of society is destroyed. It is destroyed because greater knowledge makes one more valuable to commercial society, and as such, they will receive more money and no longer be in need of welfare, as the have-nots produce more goods and services, bringing them up into the middle class, into the bourgeois class of society. And therefore, the Democratic Party, in order to preserve its survival, will not want the proliferation of knowledge to proceed. Therefore, the Democratic Party would be content with just leaving crime as it is and let it be wherever it may be found. They don't want society to get better. Or I should say, they don't want the have-nots to get better. Therefore, the low information voter will be happy because they continue to receive their transfer payments without having to work much for it. The haves of society will want to introduce this process and continue this process because they want to stay in power, and they'll want to stay in power because of dictum 1, that all life does that, which is good for it. Staying in power would allow them to continue to amass wealth on top of what they already have, just as societies have been throughout the last 5,000 years, whereby the kings and queens and the aristocracy rule over the have-nots. I hope you enjoyed this program, and we'll see you next week.